Hi, Steve Griffith from Griffith Consulting. Today I want to talk a little bit about the importance of how we change what we call our future needed result. Everything that we talk about in terms of change is really all about understanding that where we are now, which is in the present, and what we want to create in the future is what we refer to as a future needed result. Now, the interesting thing about that is that we have a past, and that past is the way we've always done things. Now, when we talk about the brain, and let's just take the brain from Freudian terminology, we have a conscious thinking mind and a subconscious mind. Now, in modern terms, we now understand that the brain itself is a physical apparatus. It's the junction point between what we refer to as the non-physical, which is a thought. So if we can imagine a thought coming from somewhere, but let's just say it comes deep within the subconscious mind, we become conscious of it at the surface value of the mind. But the moment you think a thought, you practice brain chemistry. So the thought itself, even though it might be abstract, the moment you actually think it, the brain converts it into what we call a neurochemical. And that neurochemical operates through a myriad of what we call neurons and dendrites. And really what happens in the brain is that we create what's called pathways or neurological pathways. So when, for example, you play sport or a musical instrument, or you're actually repeating any particular thought or pattern or activity over and over again, you can imagine we build in the brain a neurological highway. It's like the linkage between neurons is what we call dendrites, and these are quite thick. Other activities that we don't have, that we don't repeat very often, they're like very little backtracks, right? And yet those that we repeat have a superhighway. So in sport, for example, somebody that repeats over and over and over and over and over again through training builds what we call a neurological highway rather than a backtrack. So a golfer, my golf obviously is a bit of a backtrack. Someone that plays a lot of golf and trains and practices builds a superhighway. So this aspect of thought being very what we might call ephemeral, or we talk about having 80,000 thoughts every day, but in fact what's happening is that these thoughts repeated build what we call a neurological map. Fine. That is often been today called neuroplasticity, that we create what we're repeating and doing, and that map itself is not like a frozen sculpture, it's actually like a moving river. So what's happening is that when I go to change something, I begin to influence this map, I begin to influence the neurological pathways. But what happens is the past is so incredibly powerful that it begins to create a map which is very set. That's what we call habit or an habituated routine. So at some point you may have consciously chosen that thought, like I'm going to eat this, or I'm going to exercise or not exercise. But after a while, that conscious choice becomes a habit, which becomes a routine, and that begins to build this pathway here, which then begins to drive, which is in the present, our behaviours and routine. So we kind of, this future needed result, or this future results we're getting, is very much and directly related to what we're doing in the present, but the past is incredibly powerful because it kind of dictates the present. So we can say the past is even more powerful than the future because it keeps us actually in this realm of doing things the same way. So let's say we want to change it. Let's say someone comes in with a new idea, all right, or a new way of thinking, okay. It might be the idea of a new routine. So our brain immediately scans the subconscious, which is our pre-existing hardwiring, and if it cannot find a pre-recognized pathway that supports this new thinking or this new idea, what do you think it does? Rejects. So what it does is it rejects that thinking because it's hardwired to the way we've always done things. So what happens is that we find it difficult to change. And so even if this new idea, even though it doesn't actually find itself in what we might call a past recognized idea or thought, even if we don't want to reject it, we have to build a new pathway. And so the great thing about a human being is that they can actually think in reverse and they can think forward. So for example, an animal obviously is very different to the human animal. So the human animal has this ability to reflect on the past and actually vision the future. Obviously that's what makes us what we call the worrying animal, because we worry about things we can't change, or we worry about the past which we can't change, and we worry about the future that hasn't happened yet. So that's why we do a pretty good job of destroying the present. But really, we use the mind for its most powerful tool, and that's to create a different result in the future. So what that has to do with is actually creating a vision of what we want to happen out here. Now, unfortunately, what happens is a lot of people think what's happening out here is actually really creating what's going on in here, when it's really the other way around. This is an inside game. If we want to change the future needed result, we've got to change what's going on in here. We've got to change our thinking. And to do that, we have to set a goal. And this is very important because it's only by choosing to think differently that will drive this new pattern down here that will then drive a new routine or new behaviour. The problem is it takes 120 days to change this old pathway into a new pathway. And so to do that, we have to get very clear about our goals. And if we've got 80,000 thoughts, we've really got to choose no more than 4 or 5 goals in actually redirecting our routine or behaviour. Now, what's very interesting about this is most people set their goals wrongly. All right, so what they do if someone wants to lose weight, for example, they might say, I want to lose 10 kilos, when really that's not a goal, that's an outcome. A goal is what is the action or routine that's going to produce that outcome. So when we come back to our goals, we've got to go look at the way we do it, and it's got to be a command. So human beings have really developed a high degree of the science and art of what we call procrastination. So we always put off things. We refer to words like integrity. Integrity really means that I am my word to myself. So when I go to bed at night and I go, tomorrow morning I'm going to wake up, I'm going to actually run, jump, go for a swim, meditate, do yoga, whatever. And I wake up in the morning and I go, maybe I'll do it tomorrow. And so we put it off. So what we want to understand is that we build personal willpower by following through with our word to ourselves. Now, the only way we can do that is establish a clear goal. And to do that, we have to make a command to the subconscious from the conscious thinking mind. So here in the conscious thinking mind, we have to get very clear and make a pathway out of these 80,000 goals for 3, 4 or 5 goals. So here, and we must use a command. Now, command must be first person present tense. The most powerful words in the English language which do that is I am, all right? And so I am walking 30 minutes a day, 5 days a week. Now that's very clear. It's a clear command to the brain which begins to build a new pathway. So I am walking 20 minutes, 30 minutes, 5 days a week, right? Even has to be what time of day to be very specific. So when we get that, we write that out. I am walking 20 or 30 minutes, 5 days per week at 7 o'clock in the morning. that's a command that has to be very clear. Why is that important? To create the future needed result, to give me more energy, to lose weight, to lose 10 kilos, to feel better, all of the other stuff that goes as a byproduct of it. But the goal must be specific, and we must actually begin to visualize that goal. Now, that's part of it. We should write it down because that makes a very big difference to the actual power of the goal itself. But the subconscious is also here where the emotional heart is. This is where we must engage the emotional part of our own self in that goal. So when we think about it, we visualize it, we must become emotionally involved in this future outcome, right? So what begins to happen then is our routines change. We begin to gradually move towards actually creating the activity to produce the outcome. Our behaviours begin to change. So in the beginning it might be that it's difficult and we're not really enjoying it. But as we move through these first 120 days, the routine begins to rewire the brain, and actually we begin to love going for a walk, and then we begin to love the feeling that comes out of it. And this is a very important experience, because what we want to do is, when we set this goal and we understand that this future needed result is an inside game and that creates the routines and behaviours, we must understand another thing, and that is that don't go with how you feel, go with how now, don't go with how you feel now, go with how you're going to feel afterwards. So once you create this routine and you've got these two little thoughts going on in the mind when you wake up in the morning, the one thought says, you said you're going to go for a walk, run, whatever it is that you're going to do, and this other thought says, don't worry about it. You begin to kind of get the experience of what it feels like when you do it. And you've got to capture that, right? So that's the emotional side. So when you capture how good it feels when you've come back from that run or walk or swim or yoga or and you go, that's what I want. And then that begins to imprint it in the subconscious. So when you wake up and then I'm going to go for a run and you don't feel like it, you don't go with that mood. You go with how you're going to feel when you come back, right? So goal setting is really important. Most people don't set goals correctly. So to create the future needed result, we have to get very clear as the inside game of what we want to create out here, and create a command to the subconscious, repeat that pattern for 120 days, and then begin to develop new routines and behaviours that create the future needed result. That can make a big difference. And you only need to do one thing, and then you begin to develop confidence and you begin to develop energy that allows you to really set more goals. Anyway, if you're interested in more, go to griffithconsulting.com.